This is Philip Palumbo. I'm the host of the Palumbo podcast, where we interview some of the most successful money managers, economists, and market strategists. Today we have with us Marc Pentopoulos of Vista Point Capital. Marc has 27 years experience in the healthcare industry. He owned his own pharmaceutical company called Katana Pharmaceutical, where he focused on neonatal therapeutics. Marc currently runs his own hedge fund, and it's focused exclusively on the healthcare industry. So we're looking forward to getting his insights and perspectives on what he feels the future of healthcare looks like. So Marc, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. So Marc, I want to start with first your background. Can you share with us how you get into the healthcare field?
Yeah, sure. So I have an undergraduate degree in molecular biology and was really always interested in biology and how it translated into human health. And but at the same time, as much as I really loved learning about it, I didn't particularly care for lab work. So I decided after college to go into kind of the business side of healthcare. And so I started with investment banking and did that for a number of years before I moved to the investing side. So I've always had a real interest in healthcare. It's deep in my family as well. One of my sisters is a doctor, and my dad was in the orthopedic industry for a long time. So it was just kind of in my family, and just had a real interest in it. So I was just kind of drawn to it. And, over time, I have seen the banking side of things. I've done operational work, founded a biotech company. I've been on the investing side. So I've seen kind of many different facets of the healthcare field. And, right now I'm just very focused now on the investing side. I think it's a really compelling time to be looking at healthcare from an investing standpoint. So, that's why, I'm really excited to speak with you and also to get the word out on the fund and what I'm doing.
That's terrific. So Marc, I want to talk about, which I thought was phenomenal when you told me about it, was Katana Pharmaceuticals. Can you tell me about what you were doing there, what you achieved there when you owned Katana?
Sure. Yeah. So, obviously, there's a huge opiate epidemic in the country, right? And it's very unfortunate. But one of the things that's not really talked about so much is that there are a number of babies born addicted every year, and it's a very, very expensive proposition for the states. Usually, these babies end up in the NICU for weeks on end because they're withdrawing from opiates, essentially. And so they have a lot of issues around developmental disorders. They, you hear the stories of people going through withdrawal from opiates and how severe it is. Now just imagine that for a neonate, right? I mean, it's actually horrifying what happens. And we had been doing some work, me and my partner on the project had been doing some work for another company. And he had some experience in using this peptide oxytocin to attenuate the withdrawal symptoms of people going through withdrawal from various drugs. We decided to give it a try and see how it would look like in the neonate setting, given that it's a very safe and well-characterized peptide. And we saw some very dramatic responses. So we got some intellectual property around it, formed kind of the process for developing the drug and getting it through the FDA, and then we sold it off to another entity so that they could do the final development work and commercialize the product. So it was, a very interesting experience for me because I learned a lot about development of novel IP and a lot of regulatory work that's required to actually get drugs through the clinic as well as the manufacturing. So things that you don't necessarily think about a lot when you're looking at stocks, for instance. But there's a lot of underlying things that go on with a biotech company that are very complex, and you really have to understand them if you're able to fully kind of validate and vet a company that you're looking at from an investment standpoint.
So, Marc, these biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, when it comes to getting drugs approved, is it really that difficult?
It is difficult, and the reason it is difficult is because you have to demonstrate that it's safe and effective, and that you can manufacture it under good manufacturing processes and get it to the market in a safe and effective way. So it is actually quite difficult. You have to run many studies to demonstrate the safety of it. Then you have to demonstrate the efficacy of it. Then you have to demonstrate that you can produce it in a safe manner and that it's stable, for some period of time. And then you have to ship it and manufacture it and ship it to the doctors and make sure that it's being used correctly by doctors. So it's certainly it's certainly complex, which is also why once a product is approved, it usually ends up being very lucrative from an investment standpoint, because it's not so easy for competitors to jump in. You can't just quickly make a knockoff of a drug and get it to the market. There's a lot that goes into that. So I kind of view the sector as one which is, there's a lot of challenges up front, but once you are successful, then there's a lot of reward on the back end.
So when we say safety, right? When the FDA uses the word safety, you use the word safety, right? How does the FDA define safety? Does it mean that I utilize a certain medication to fix a problem, and as long as I don't die, that's considered safety? But because we all do know that when you take certain drugs, it can affect some other aspect of your body, whatever that means,
Sure.
an organ,
Sure.
right? So help me understand safety. What do they mean by that?
Sure. So the first level of safety is what are called animal toxicology studies. So basically what they do is they will give it to animals over a period of time. If it's a drug that you're going to just use once in a while, then it's going to be a short toxicology program. If it's a drug that you're going to be taking once a day, every day for the rest of your life, then there's a different kind of toxicology program that you have to run. Really, what the FDA wants to understand is, does it hurt you? Does it cause cancer in the long run if you use it for a long time? If a mother is taking it, would it affect her, fetus at all? So these are the types of things the FDA wants to understand before they'll even let you try it in the clinic. And then once they try it in the clinic, then you're going to look at, what are the adverse events? Does it cause headache? Does it cause palpitations of the heart? Does it cause, cancer down the road? Things like that. So the FDA really wants to understand what the risk reward of a drug presents, right? So if it's going to help you, then the question is, what are the adverse events? And as long as the reward is much, greater than the potential for adverse events, usually the FDA will let it through. And also the FDA thinks about the indication. If you have terminal cancer, they're going to be much more tolerant of the side effects than if you are just being treated for, say, migraine or something like that.
Right.
So again, it's really kind of a process that the FDA goes through to try to evaluate what is the benefit of the drug and what are the risks of the drug, and make sure that the risk benefit is appropriate for that specific drug. So that's really what the FDA goes through in their process around safety.
So the risk reward, is it black and white? Like, does the FDA have a notebook and that with tabs in it that says risk reward of certain drugs, or is it just ad hoc?
It's a bit of both, really. So they're going to, for certain, indications where there's a number of drugs already on the market, they may say, okay, this is the parameters by which we would, accept a drug in terms of its safety profile. If, for instance, it's a brand new drug, like some novel orphan disease where, there's no drug on the market for it, the FDA is going to be more ad hoc, because they're going to basically want to know from patients, from doctors, hey, what's your experience? I know there are these side effects with this drug, but on the whole, would you say the patient's better off with this drug or worse off with this drug? And so, it's a bit of both. So I think, with tried and true indications where there's a lot of drugs already approved, they're going to be very intolerant of side effects if it's an indication which does not kill you, and they're going to be more tolerant if it's something like cancer. But on new drugs or new indications, they're going to be a little more ad hoc and get a little more feedback from that patient community as to what would be acceptable.
Is there a whole entire committee that approves each drug, or is it like one or two people within the FDA?
The FDA has a number of committees, right? So there's obviously, the committee that focuses on neurological drugs, and there's one that focuses on urological drugs and oncology and things like that. So the FDA is split up into many different groups, and the approval really runs to the top of that group. But you have a lot of reviewers underneath that are looking at all aspects of the drug, and within the FDA, although you may have a division that is focused on, say, oncology drugs, there's going to be within that a whole group that looks at the safety of those oncology drugs, that wants to monitor these oncology drugs as they get used. So there are many layers within the FDA, even within each of these different divisions.
And when it comes to the ingredients in these drugs, do most of these ingredients come from overseas?
No, not necessarily. Some do, but some are produced here in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has a lot of manufacturing facilities around biologics and small molecules, and I think as you've seen in the last few years, there's been a growing demand to kind of onshore production of drugs, especially drugs that are critical. Like, if you have all of your drugs that are antibiotic drugs being manufactured offshore, that could be a problem if there's global, conflict that restricts the amount of that drug that can be shipped to your country because of some sort of conflict. So I think the country as a whole is kind of onshoring, a lot more drug manufacturing these days. But you still do see, quite a few drugs that are still imported from other countries.
So, Marc, you had this incredible background owning your own pharmaceutical company and other things like that in your past before your pharmaceutical company. How'd you get into investing? Why did you get into investing?
Well, it actually I kind of fell into investing in the sense that I was in investment banking and I was recruited by a fund out in San Francisco to come and help to kind of start their healthcare effort. And just had a good rapport with the owner of the firm, and he had wanted to do more in this space. But the space is a very esoteric space. There's a lot of complexities with investing in the biotech space because it's not easy to understand. We've talked about some of the safety aspects, the FDA aspects, the manufacturing aspects, things like that. So you have all of that on top of the biology and how well does the drug work and what does the competitive landscape look like. So I kind of joined that firm to kind of help kick those efforts off. And I just found it quite interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating field, and it's changing all the time. There's always new stuff coming up, so it's continually evolving. And just kind of really found myself very interested in the investing side of it, which is why I've spent a good chunk of my career looking at companies from an investor perspective.
A lot of people look at investing in healthcare and biotech, where you're invested in this particular biotech company, and most of their future free cash flows is going to come from a potential drug breakthrough and approval by FDA. So investors would say, okay, Marc, you got a great track record, but there must be a lot of volatility because, how do you get it right with a particular biotech company that you feel so sanguine that they're going to be able to get a particular drug approved? Is that part of a way that you make money in your fund?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are ways you can handicap a drug, right? So you're never going to get it 100% right in this field, right? There are things that kind of come out of left field. There's been an instance earlier this week where over the weekend, a drug that had been recently approved all of a sudden showed, some doctors presented on some inflammation that people had not seen before with this drug. And it's an eye drug. So, the last thing you want is a drug causing inflammation for that. So you're never going to get it 100% right because we're dealing with biology. And in many ways, we're dealing with novel biology, which means we don't fully understand everything just yet. But there are things you can do to handicap. I mean, obviously, the number one factor is the team. Is this a team that has a lot of experience in this area, that really knows what they're doing, that have had success in this area before? What is the disease? Again, we talked about safety. If you're talking about a disease with no current treatments, the FDA is going to be more lenient. The burden of proof is going to be lower if this is a disease with no current therapies. What did the clinical data show? How is this manufactured? Is this easy to manufacture? Is it difficult to manufacture? So there are a number of factors you can look at to determine, does this thing have a good shot at being approved? And I think if you really have a good core handle on those things, you'll get it right majority of the time.
So as far as your discipline, tell me about your discipline to selection of these types of stocks.
Sure. So, the core kind of, features of these companies is you have to have a good management team that really knows what they're doing. You have to have good science and good biology, and your data has to, show that you are doing something in these patients that kind of ameliorate the symptoms of their disease. You have to look at companies where the product has a good opportunity out there. If you have a novel drug and there's a defined number of patients and you can charge a lot for that, with some sort of orphan indication, then there's a good market there. If you've got a brand new novel migraine treatment that works in patients that nothing else works in, that's a good opportunity. If you're coming in as a lipid lowering drug against a lot of generic drugs out there, there's probably not much opportunity unless you can somehow treat patients that have already failed all of these drugs. So you've got to make sure that there's a good market opportunity for the product, once it does get approved. And then you have to look at the intellectual property and make sure that the product will have a good runway of being the, protected product on the market. Because, as we said, you spend a lot of investment up front and then you want to reap the reward.
Right.
If you get to the market and your product's going to come off patent after 6 or 7 years, you may not capture a lot of value in that short period of time. So you've got to look at all of these factors. And then you have to look at the valuation you're paying for the company. If you think that the company has a $1 billion product, but the valuation of the company is already $3 billion and you're not even through phase 2 yet, your risk reward is not that great on that company. If, on the other hand, you find something that has $1 billion potential and the market cap is 200 million and they're close to market and they've got the team in place to develop this thing and launch it and they're well funded, it provides for a pretty interesting risk reward. So, that's kind of my job, is to try to, be disciplined about the value that I will pay for a company, assuming all those other factors that I just previously discussed are in place.
Management is everything as it relates to when you own a stock of any great business, or even if you own a private business, right? They lead everything, right? They set the tone for the entire company. I mean, that's been proven day in and day out, right? Same thing as a coach of a major sports team or any type of athletic team. They lead everything, right? They set the tone for everything. As an investor, how do you sniff out the bad ones?
Well, a lot of it's just experience, right? So a lot of it is just having followed the industry for a long time and knowing the past track record of these folks, knowing who they used to work with. How can you diligence these people? Do you know somebody that used to work with them that can tell you a little bit about them? What does the board look like? How strong is that board? Is that board a board that's going to be willing to step in and make changes if things go wrong? Or are they, buddies with the CEO and they're just going to let the CEO kind of do whatever they want? So these are some things you have to take into consideration. A lot of that is just experience, is just meeting management teams many, many times over the years, watching what they do, what's their background, who they work with before, things of that nature. And again, you're never going to get 100% right, but you want to do really good due diligence there because, as you said, they set the tone for things. Certain teams, they always, set the wrong tone. And, as an investor, you really don't make money in those companies. Certain management teams, they bat 100%, right? Everything they do, they vet it. They're very careful about what they do, and they typically have success with what they do. So, you just have to kind of go through that process of researching them and finding out what their background is and how credible they are, and then meeting with them and really understanding, how are they thinking about it, and making sure that they're thinking on how they're going to, get their drug approved and get it to market aligns with kind of best practices in the industry. Other than that, it's just a lot of legwork and there's, no real magic to it. It's just a bit of due diligence and a bit of kind of experience. I think that really that matter there.
Marc, can you give us an example where you were interested in a particular company, but then something you found out about management turned you off and you ended up being right?
I mean, it happens a lot. And, one of the things I I look at is, typically when I don't like a management team, I'll just avoid the company. There's just no point in spending time on it because, you kind of know where this is eventually going to end up. But it's also good to keep it on the radar because if one day you wake up and you see a press release that management team has been placed, then maybe if you liked what they had going on, but you just didn't like the management team, then maybe it's time to revisit that. So I would say that there's quite a few teams that really I would say they're not really committed to shareholder value. And if you really want to do a quick and dirty dive on them, you just go and look at the stock price history of what that company did while that person was CEO, and
right.
that'll tell you
a lot,
quite a bit right there. Exactly.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to hold you to this number, but if you had to just throw out a number, right? As long as you've been doing this out of all the biotech companies, healthcare companies that are out there, right? You don't know all of them, you haven't researched all of them, but from all the companies you've worked with in this biotech space where you're looking to get drugs approved, et cetera, what percentage of the management teams are competent? If you had to put a number out there.
I would say no more than a third.
Wow.
And that even may be a little bit high, but sometimes teams, they will make mistakes, but then they will get it right. And that's actually a very fertile area where to find research ideas is to find companies that have slipped up, but the management team can articulate what happened, why it happened, and what they're doing to remediate the situation. Probably just a small percentage of management teams kind of are able to get through that. Very few companies are just a blockbuster success out of the gate and never have any issues and everything goes right all the time. Very few companies are like that. So it's really a lot of it is just to try to understand, which companies can actually go through the tough times and see success on the other side. And I would say that probably no more than a third of management teams are capable of doing that.
Oh, that's incredible. Marc, when you're looking at businesses and as far as patent protection, right? You mentioned it before. Is there a minimum patent protection period that you're looking for before you would invest?
I would say, it depends on where they are in the clinic. I would say you really want a minimum of 10 years on the market before any generic could come in. I mean, you really want that because you're going to be growing your product in the first 5 years, right? And then the big cash flow kind of comes, after year 5. So I typically like at least 10 years, hopefully longer than that.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about valuation, which is my favorite thing to talk about, right? It's all about price you pay, whether it's real estate, whether it's other sectors within the stock market, private businesses, everything in life it's the price you pay is what you're going to get. You could have a great company, but the price isn't right. You could have a great company where the price is right. That's what we're interested in. In the biotech space, especially when companies are looking to get approved for various drugs, et cetera, and you're making predictions about free cash flow in the future of a particular drug that gets approved, how do you figure out valuation? How do you do valuation work?
Yeah, it's not easy, but you really have to look at, what's the potential for the product? What is that potential? Again, how much money is it going to take to get there, to get to that cash flow positive area? Or, what is a buyer, what is an acquirer going to be willing to pay for that product, right? So that's when you're looking at kind of terminal value, you have to kind of think about those factors. And then when you're looking at market cap, you really want to be looking at enterprise value because, if you're talking about a company with $500 million that has $100 million in cash that needs to raise another $400 million to get this product, to commercial success, that's very different than if you have a market cap of $500 million with $400 million in cash on the balance sheet, which only needs another $100 million to get the product to commercial success. So, you just have to look at kind of the enterprise value, and then you want to make sure that, the value you're paying leaves a multiple of potential upside, over, say, the next 5 years as this product gets to the market. I tend not to do very, very early biotech. I tend to come in once proof of concept in humans has been established. And that usually means kind of like post phase 1, phase 2. That's really, I think, where I will start to look. Before that, it's more of a science experiment, and I think that's more of a venture capital type of model. And I'm not that interested in that. I really like to focus on companies where I've seen that the human data lines up with what the biology would have predicted. And that's typically where I get involved. And that typically means that your product is probably no more than 5 to 6 years from the market.
I want to turn a little bit towards the actual sector measured by IBB, which is an exchange traded fund that essentially follows the biotech sector, right? Over the past 3 years, it's down 9, S&P up 41%. Over the past 5 years, 10% up, S&P up 62%, right? So we all know the healthcare sector, the biotech sector really hasn't performed well relative to the S&P. What's going on within the sector?
Well, lately it's been interest rates. A lot of that is interest rates. So
what is it about? Yeah, what is it about interest rates?
Well, so interest rates, kind of two factors. One is, as you said, these are cash flows down the road. So if you look at a discount rate on discounted future cash flows, and your weighted average cost of capital goes from 3% to 10%, that's a big change in the discount, right? So that's part of it. Also, as pharma companies are thinking about their cost of capital, right? It's very different if they're borrowing to fund an acquisition at 3% interest rates versus 10% interest rates, right? So again, I think interest rates really do matter. There was a bubble that occurred in biotech, in not so much the large cap biotechs, but the small cap biotechs, that kind of peaked in early 2021. And, what typically happens, and I've seen a couple bubbles in biotech in my career, there's kind of some new technology that comes along. It was like genomics 20 years ago, and it was kind of vaccine and RNA technology and gene editing, 3 years ago. And what happens is just as a flood of new IPOs, which kind of sucks up all the liquidity in the sector. Many of these companies have no potential for success. And even if they were all successful in getting the product to the market wouldn't be a success because you'd have too many competitors in the market, and pricing would be an issue. So we've seen this kind of cycle before, and we're kind of digesting all these small cap biotechs that went public. I think there's been plenty of opportunity to do really well in the sector. But on the whole, as you've seen interest rates kind of creep up, as there's fewer and fewer diseases that don't have a good, solution to them, and as you've seen more and more competition from more startup companies as well as pharmaceuticals, I think that's kind of factored into, the underperformance of the sector as a whole. What I like about the sector is that it's complex, and so even if the sector is stagnating on the whole, there are still opportunities to do really well on the sector based on the sector expertise.
Of course. Large farms like Merck and Pfizer, they're struggling, but Eli Lilly, especially with their breakthrough drug, with the obesity, which is meant to be as a diabetes drug, and you're seeing a lot of people now utilizing that drug to lose weight. Before we get into that, but like the larger pharmaceutical businesses, you think they're down mainly? Is it because of their pipeline, do you think? Not that they get into specific companies. I don't want to go there. I'm just saying in general, the larger farms seem to be underperforming. But isn't that a great opportunity, Marc, as we think about them going forward because of the amount of cash flow they generate, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, I think it bodes well for M&A in the biotech sector.
Yes.
So you have kind of two factors. One, you have a lot of patent expirations on big drugs.
Right.
And that's kind of kicking in now. And I think that kind of peaks in the 2028, 2029 timeframe. There's a lot of really large blockbusters that are coming off patent over the next few years. In addition, you've had, concerns about the Inflation Reduction Act, which has given provisions for Medicare to start to negotiate pricing on certain drugs. And of course, Medicare is going to want to negotiate pricing on the big drugs. So, the question has been like, okay, what is the future of these blockbusters? And how long can these big pharma companies milk these blockbuster drugs? And I think that has weighed on the sector. Of course, you've had some pharma companies do really well, those that have had the weight loss drugs, because it's a huge opportunity, and these drugs are very effective. So you've seen some real success there with a few companies, as you mentioned, like Lilly and Novo Nordisk. But other companies have really struggled, and that's because of their patent cliff, as well as concerns about this IRA. Because remember, this IRA allows for an increasing number of drugs which Medicare can negotiate on over time.
Right.
And so there is concern that, in 10 years' time, anytime you have a blockbuster, you're going to have 7 or 8 years before CMS comes in and starts to negotiate hard on pricing. And so that's going to create a lot of headwind for pharmaceutical companies, no doubt about it.
Would you be an investor in these pharmaceutical companies at these levels, at their valuations?
It's never an area I really focus on. I mean, I think companies like Lilly have don't have a lot of risk, because a lot of their pipeline and their products are very fresh, but they're also the largest pharmaceutical company in the world now by market cap. So there's not a lot of really great opportunity in the pharma space right now. From my perspective, you may see some movement back into pharma if we look like we may have some sort of recessionary pressure ahead, because they're typically seen as a defensive area. But on the whole, I don't see a lot of huge opportunity in the pharma sector right now.
I don't know, Mark, how much research you've done into this, and if you didn't, it's not a problem. The weight loss drug by Lilly, right? It's taken the world by storm.
Yeah,
it's something that it helps with diabetic and people who have pre-diabetes. And once you start to take this, ingest this drug, you tend to lose weight, and it tends to stay off as long as you take this drug. But then there's been a lot of talk about emergency room visits as a result of the drug, kidney failure, et cetera. You have a view about this drug and what's going on with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I think they are very effective. We know that you lose a lot of fat quickly with these, right, but we also know that you lose some muscle mass with these as well.
Right.
So that presents its own issues, right, when you lose muscle mass, and so and that we don't know the long-term safety on these, right? I mean, it's that's a question mark that still kind of needs to be answered. I mean, remember the old fen-phen drug, right, for weight loss? Yes, that was, right, from, I mean, that was on the market for a while before they started to realize, okay, there's some real issues here, right? So we just don't know right now. I think so far it looks like the side effect profile is manageable, but, I just wouldn't want to predict 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I just think that, you don't really know until you have many, many years of these drugs being on the market. I think, again, if it's, if you're just dealing with a diabetic, right? Okay, they've got diabetes. Diabetes can become a very severe disease. It can become deadly if it's not treated. That's one thing. But if you're just talking about people that are like, hey, I don't really feel like exercising and I eat too much, so I'm just going to take this drug as a kind of way of managing my weight. Again, the burden of side effect profile does start to creep in at some point in time if you do start to see side effects in a patient population that is normally healthy. It's just more lifestyle that's been an issue with them. So again, let's see. I don't think there's any drug that's ever like completely side effect profile free. You're changing the biology in the drug, and there's always a yin and yang to the body and to biology.
That's right.
So let's see. But I don't want to make a verdict on these. I think time will tell, but there's always a risk that something will show up down the road.
Mark, what attracted me to working with you, as we spoke about, was when many people think about biotech and the biotech industry and portfolio managers, they think, oh, this manager is just going to invest in companies that are looking to get a drug passed through the FDA, right? When in fact, there are other ways to invest in healthcare. And in fact, we talked about your fund being healthcare innovation would be the space. And there's 3 parts to that. right? There is the biotech approval of drugs. There's the medical devices and diagnostics, right? So there's three parts to what you look for in terms of how you manage money. Could you just talk about that briefly, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I think, it does come down to innovation, right? It is, what is this company doing that's of great value to the system that is not being done currently, and do they have something underlying that's some sort of technology or product underlying that is enabling this? I do have companies that are commercial companies in the portfolio, but I also have companies that are in phase 2 development in the portfolio that may get bought even before they even get to the commercial side of things. I think what's important is always to take into consideration is how does this benefit the system in a cost-effective way, right? That's really kind of core to my thinking on these things. And again, that goes back to what is the disease, what is the issue, what's the cost, if you will, of not treating it or not diagnosing it, and then how does this product come in and solve that issue in a way that's cost effective for the society?
That's what it is.
That's really the core of how I think about things.
Which obviously makes total logical sense, right? It's complex, but it's simplistic in terms of how you have to think in terms of a specific disease, how large and how many people have the disease. I mean, unfortunately, Mark, and I think this is true, right? There are diseases out there that are very, not minor, but that are, there's not a plethora of a particular disease out there, right? There's a small fragment of people that have a particular disease that's pretty much unknown, right? With no particular cure to it. And drug companies won't focus on cures of those types of diseases because there's not really money to be made because not a large population of people have that particular disease. Although there are situations where you have diseases that are not so pronounced, that there are companies out there trying to solve for that. So just, what does that look like in your world?
Yeah, so that is actually, it is actually an interesting area, and especially if there's less than 250,000 patients in the U.S. that have that disease, because then it qualifies for orphan designation. And when you get orphan designation, you can actually charge a lot more for your product. So these do provide for some interesting opportunity, especially if the patient population is kind of very concentrated into a few centers. And the reason that makes it interesting is if a small company is able to get it through the FDA, then they can actually commercialize it themselves because they don't need 3,000 salespeople. They can handle the market with a small sales force. And they only need to target, let's say 100 doctors around the country, because those 100 doctors treat the majority of the patients with this condition. So I think, again, it is interesting if it requires a lot of work to identify these patients because the symptoms are very mild and nobody, most of these patients are either underdiagnosed because nobody complains a lot about their symptoms, then it's very different than if, okay, no, this is a very severe patient population. They have real abnormalities and they can't live a normal life, or they have high mortality. Then that's actually a very different proposition. And I would tend to favor those types of diseases where they are less than 250,000. There's a very severe, these diseases have very, very severe symptoms, and that the biology is understood, and you can intervene with a drug and almost normalize those patients. I mean, if you can do something very dramatic in these patients, then payers are willing to pay quite a lot for that. And those are very interesting opportunities. If you're barely moving the needle on the disease, or these patients aren't very severe and there's kind of normal other drugs that doctors will just use to treat these patients, it's less interesting at that point in time. So again, looking at, how many patients have it and what can you charge for it to kind of build your model on the market opportunity is a key component of what I do.
That's very interesting. And then last question, Mark, is what does the future of the healthcare industry look like in your eyes?
Well, I think, we need to figure out ways to cut costs. So I think, that the earlier diagnosis of of diseases is going to be critical to this. I think there is an understanding that certain diseases that are very severe that are caused by genetic abnormalities may be able to be fixed with a one-time treatment, whether that be gene editing or whether that be, gene therapy. I think that's a fascinating area. And I think, that will kind of grow over time. And I think that, the use of AI is really going to make an impact on healthcare over time in the way that we design drugs and we segment patient populations and we get drugs approved. I think that over time, you're going to see drugs that are more and more tailored for certain specific patient populations. I think that movement is already underway and it's going to continue over time. And I think we're going to be able to develop drugs much more quicker in the future than we have in the past because we understand the biology and because we have the computing power now to really kind of quickly subsegment the patients into those that will really benefit versus those that will not, and we'll be able to spot side effects earlier on. So all of these things will change over time. I think pricing pressures are coming through the IRA and through patent expirations, and that's going to drive pharma and biotech to be more efficient in the way that they develop drugs. So there's a lot of moving pieces right now. But the biology and our understanding of biology is really rapidly evolving, and so I think it's a fascinating time to be involved in the space. And I think that there's a lot of change coming, but I think it is for the benefit. And I think our drugs are just going to get better and better, and we're eventually going to end up with cures, one-time cures. That's still kind of down the road a little bit, but we are going to head there.
Excellent. Excellent. Marc, this has been excellent. Every time I talk to you, I always enjoy our conversations to learn about the healthcare industry. I find it fascinating. We are super excited to have you as a strategic partner of the firm to assist us with our clients' money and investing in the proper stocks of great businesses that we believe will do very well as we think about the world of healthcare and the innovativeness that we're going to see going forward. So we thank you for all your efforts there.
Yep. Well, thank you. Look forward to working together and collaborating on this. I do think it's a fascinating area, and I'm excited to get this project going.
All right, Marc. Thanks very much. I appreciate everything.